what we are talking here is a clash of two different categories, the Dharmic way and the other one. Now, what has the role of science been in this clash? Thank you.
What is the role of science? Because, you know, science is a sort of neutral, culturally neutral. If you discover something through a telescope and somebody in Japan looks at the same part of the sky, and somebody from China and somebody from South Africa, they will say they found the same thing. And if you have a certain laboratory experiment and others can replicate the experiment, they'll get the same result. So you do have a certain external truth, because it is external objectified truth and not internal subjective truth. You can have a universal claim which is not civilization dependent. Science is a very wonderful thing. Now, science, because its scope is limited to what is empirically measurable, science does not have a position, cannot honestly take a position on things which are not empirically measurable. So it cannot validate or falsify whether, you know, Muhammad got that dream, because you cannot put it in a laboratory today and mention and measure it. It cannot validate or falsify whether, you know, those who died went to heaven, because we don't have a telescope that looks at heaven. We don't. I mean, you know, so a realm which is beyond observability of science cannot be within the scope of science. That doesn't mean it is false. It doesn't mean it is unscientific or anti-scientific. It just means it is outside the scope and domain of science. Now, something very interesting in our tradition, which the Abrahamic traditions don't have, and the book explains, there is this Adhyatma Vidya, inner experience, which is empirical but personal. It is called first person empiricism, means my experience of a certain technique which gave me a certain experience. Yeah? And I can teach it to you, and you have to find for yourself whether you got that experience or not. This is called first person empiricism. Nobody can observe it through the telescope or microscope and like you are observing something external to yourself. The telescope and microscope and laboratory is within. And the instrument of knowing is a very clean mind which is still, which is not disturbed mind, which is not jumping around. And that is what meditation tries to do, is give you a stillness, clarity of a sattvic mind, clarity of mind. So when you are in a stillness of clarity mind and very hyper alert consciousness, you experience things which are not normally experienced, because the cluttered mind and agitated mind is covering it up. The veil is there. So when you are into that stillness, that veil is not there, and you realize that you already have that inside you. It's not something external you're watching. So this methodology, which is the height of our tradition, is, I call it first person empiricism. It is empiricism because I can replicate it, I can teach somebody else, and he can validate it or falsify it. And it is observable in the present moment, and it is not something that you have to experience when you die in some other place. Now this first person empiricism is scientific. It's a new kind of science. It's first person empirical science. Because it is verifiable, it is reproducible. Science has to be verifiable by somebody and reproducible. Whereas the Abrahamic religion's historical claim, history can't be reproducible. But this is not historical claim, this happens to everybody. So if you do a certain thing, you get a certain siddhi, you get a certain clarity. It may take you a very long time. It may require a huge sacrifice. It may take many births because your person may be messed up to start with. But enough people have validated it to give this lineage, to give lineages long-term sustainability. Because ultimately, if the methodology doesn't work, people abandon it. Because the demands being made are lifelong, huge amount of demands to go into this and give up so many things. People aren't going to do that if it didn't work. So the validation of science, closest we can get, is in our tradition, which is first person empiricism, replicated by others who are taught, and if it didn't work, they would wander off. If it does work, they'll propagate it to the next person. So even though a very small percent of the Hindu population have been at that stage where they're practicing it successfully and able to get this, even that small percentage is enough to create credibility for the other population that they want to at least practice it and try it and believe in it. Whereas the option is closed, the option of verifiability is closed in a tradition where certain things happen in history that are not reproducible, nobody else can have them because of the nature of man. Because of the nature of man not being Satchitanand and not being the same as that other person, therefore that experience is impossible and beyond reach. So we have that edge in scientific terms, but it is not the same kind of scientific validation as third person empirical science, which is external.